David sat at his desk late into the night, staring at his laptop as the world outside blurred into silence. The clock ticked steadily, but something felt wrong. The light above him flickered once, twice, before the room froze in stillness. The hum of the city vanished, replaced by an unnatural silence that pressed on his chest. His hands hovered over the keyboard as he whispered, "This can't be real." For a heartbeat, the window outside showed the street frozen mid-motion, a car suspended in place, a bird unmoving in the air. He gasped, standing quickly, breath shallow, eyes wide. The world shifted, everything resuming with a snap, as though nothing had happened. David clutched the desk, whispering again, "Did reality just glitch?" His mind spun, fear and curiosity wrestling within him as the night grew darker. The next morning, David pored over online forums, searching desperately for answers. He read stories of people seeing repeating numbers, déjà vu moments, entire days that felt copied and pasted. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he whispered, "It's not just me." He found an article claiming glitches were proof of a simulated universe, written by a scientist long dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. A chill ran through him. He scribbled frantic notes, each word scratching deeper into the idea that reality might be manufactured. He muttered, "If we are inside a system, who's running it?" The thought refused to leave, growing louder with each passing second. That afternoon, David walked through the park, desperate to breathe. Yet as children laughed and joggers passed, the world felt off. A man in a suit repeated the same motion twice, tying his shoe, standing, then bending again as though caught in a loop. David froze, whispering, "Not possible." He turned to see a woman pass by with identical movements, steps mirrored, as if duplicated. Panic surged. He rubbed his eyes, but the motions continued. His pulse raced, the edges of reality fraying before his eyes. He muttered, "This is real. I'm seeing it," though no one else reacted. That night, David found himself in a dim bar, nursing a drink alone. A stranger slid into the seat beside him. Cloaked in shadows, their voice was low and cryptic. "You've seen it, haven't you?" they asked, eyes glinting faintly. David stiffened, whispering, "Seen what?" The stranger smirked, answering the cracks in the code. David's hand trembled against his glass. He wanted to demand answers, but the stranger rose quickly, leaving only a napkin behind with a symbol drawn on it, a spiral twisting inward. David stared at it, whispering, "Who are you?" But the figure was gone, vanished as though they had never been there. Alone in his apartment, David stared at the spiral symbol, tracing it over and over in his notebook. His thoughts spun endlessly. He whispered, "If reality is code, then someone wrote it." His voice cracked, filled with dread and awe. Sleep refused to come. He imagined wires beneath the world, strings pulling every movement, his own thoughts nothing but programming. He slammed the notebook shut, whispering through clenched teeth, "I have to know the truth." The obsession was no longer a spark, it was fire. The silence of the room pressed around him, a reminder that knowledge might destroy him, but ignorance would never let him rest again. David sat in the university library surrounded by stacks of books and scientific journals, each one open to highlighted sections about cosmology, quantum physics, and consciousness. His pen scratched frantically across a notepad as he whispered, "Patterns? There are always patterns." He traced equations that hinted at mathematical structures repeating in nature, from the spirals of galaxies to the double helix of DNA. His breath quickened as realization dawned. The universe looked designed, programmed even. He muttered, "If everything follows code, then maybe we're not free at all." The silence of the library pressed around him, broken only by the shuffle of distant footsteps and the eerie hum of fluorescent lights. Later that evening, David called Claire, the only person he trusted with his discoveries. She answered with a sigh, saying, "You sound obsessed again." He explained rapidly, pointing to repeating codes he had found in cosmic radiation data, his voice urgent. Claire shook her head through the phone, reminding him, not every mystery is proof of a simulation. David clenched the receiver, whispering, "But what if it is?" She grew quiet before saying softly, "Be careful, David. Curiosity can eat you alive." Her words echoed long after the line went dead, leaving him staring at the spiral symbol drawn on his notes. The next morning, David attended a lecture on advanced physics. The professor spoke about the simulation hypothesis, dismissing it as pseudoscience. "It's philosophy, not physics," the professor declared. But as laughter rippled through the class, David's heart raced. He scribbled in his notebook, whispering, "They're hiding something." His gaze swept the room, noticing a man in the back row staring at him intently, face unreadable. David turned sharply, but the figure vanished before his eyes could lock onto him again. His pulse thundered. He muttered, "Someone else knows," as the chalk scraped across the board, drowning his thoughts in static. That night, David pored through historical records on his laptop. Old journals and grainy photographs revealed stories of people describing reality glitches long before modern technology. He whispered, "It's always been here." A diary from the 1800s told of a man who swore the stars rearranged themselves before his eyes. Another described hearing a voice whispering through static long before radios existed. David's hand shook as he typed notes, realizing the phenomenon wasn't new. It was ancient. His pulse quickened as he whispered, "The code has always been leaking." Each word deepened the spiral of his obsession, pulling him further from rest. At a street corner under flickering neon signs, the same mysterious stranger appeared again. Their coat swayed as they leaned close, whispering, "Stop searching before it's too late." David stiffened, demanding, "Who are you?" The stranger's smile carried no warmth. "A messenger," they answered, slipping a small folded paper into his palm before disappearing into the crowd. David unfolded it with trembling hands. Another spiral, drawn darker and sharper this time, with the words, "They're watching." His chest tightened, the night pressing in on him. He whispered, "I can't stop now." His voice was both fear and defiance, echoing into the neon glow. David sat in his office surrounded by printed research papers, chalkboards filled with equations, and scribbled spirals taped to the walls. His eyes locked on repeating mathematical ratios found in nature. The golden spiral in seashells, the fractal growth of trees, the geometry of galaxies. He muttered, "It's everywhere." The same code, repeated endlessly. He flipped pages rapidly, each pattern confirming the next. The more he stared, the less organic it all felt. "This isn't chance," he whispered. His obsession deepened until the silence of the room seemed alive, watching him. The sensation made his skin crawl, but still, he pressed on, unable to stop himself from following the trail. David stormed into Claire's apartment, dropping stacks of papers onto her coffee table. "Look at this," he insisted, pointing to fractal patterns across natural systems. Claire frowned, crossing her arms. "You've gone too far," she said, but her voice trembled as she scanned the data. Her lips parted slightly, disbelief flickering in her eyes. David whispered urgently, "The universe looks programmed." Claire shook her head, whispering, "If you're right, then nothing we do matters." The silence hung between them, broken only by David's desperate breathing. For the first time, Claire looked shaken, her skepticism beginning to fracture. In a dusty archive, David met Thomas, a man with haunted eyes who seemed drawn to his questions. Thomas revealed a story of his sister vanishing years ago, after claiming she had seen the wires behind the sky. His voice shook as he whispered, "She said it was all fake, and then she disappeared." David's chest tightened. "What do you mean disappeared?" Thomas stared down at trembling hands. "No trace. It was as if she had been deleted." The tragedy struck deep, tethering David's theory to a painful reality. He realized the mystery was not just intellectual, it was human, with lives already lost to its shadow. Back at his apartment, David stared at his reflection in the dark window. His eyes were sunken, his face pale, his notebooks scattered in chaos. "Maybe they're right," he muttered. "Maybe I've lost myself." He tried to close his laptop, but his hands refused to obey. Lines of code blinked across the screen, patterns he hadn't typed. He whispered, "No, no, this isn't me." His obsession had isolated him, friends gone, Claire slipping away, his own sanity now fraying. Yet, even as fear gripped him, the pull of the truth was stronger. He leaned into the glow, muttering, "I can't stop now." At a closed-door symposium, Professor Morgan, a well-known physicist, addressed the crowd with calm authority. "Simulation theory is a dangerous distraction," he declared, his words laced with finality. David, seated in the audience, felt his pulse quicken. He muttered under his breath, "He knows more than he's saying." Morgan's controlled tone, the way he dismissed the idea too quickly, confirmed David's suspicion. When their eyes met, the professor's gaze lingered for a moment too long. David whispered, "He's protecting something." For the first time, David realized his search had drawn the attention of someone with real power. Someone determined to keep him in the dark. In a dim cafe, David met Marcus, a man who introduced himself as a researcher sympathetic to his work. Marcus leaned close, voice calm but persuasive. "You're right to ask these questions, but you must be careful where you look." David's pulse quickened, whispering, "How do you know what I've seen?" Marcus smiled faintly, replying, "Because I've seen it too." He offered a file, claiming it contained evidence of government experiments tied to simulation research. David clutched the folder, suspicion gnawing at him, even as hope flickered. He muttered, "Finally, someone who understands." Yet, in Marcus's steady eyes there was something unreadable, support that felt like bait. Later that night, David pored over the documents Marcus had given him. They described abandoned laboratories, strange experiments with quantum particles, and references to control protocols. His eyes widened, whispering, "It's real, they've been testing it." Yet, as he read deeper, contradictions surfaced, dates that didn't align, diagrams copied from public sources, sentences that looped without conclusion. His chest tightened. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, slamming the file shut. Doubt clawed at him. Was Marcus leading him toward truth, or deliberately away from it? The spiral symbol reappeared in one diagram, drawn crudely, a warning hidden in plain sight. David returned to Claire, waving the documents like proof. She scanned the pages, her face twisting. "These are fake," she said firmly, pointing to repeated diagrams. David snapped, "No, it can't be." Claire shook her head, her voice sharp. "You're being played." David's breath caught, doubt cracking through his determination. Claire reached across the table, pleading, "You have to step back before this destroys you." David stared down, hands trembling, whispering, "What if stepping back means never knowing?" Her silence weighed heavy, her eyes filled with fear. For the first time, David felt the ground beneath him split between truth and deception. Alone in his apartment, David slumped against the wall, surrounded by papers scattered like debris. His chest heaved as he whispered, "Maybe I've lost it." He buried his face in his hands, torn between abandoning the search and being consumed by it. Silence filled the room until the hum of his laptop pulled his gaze. A message blinked across the screen. "You are close. Keep going." David froze, heart pounding. "Who sent this?" he gasped. Fear collided with hope. Even when the path seemed dead, someone was pushing him forward. His voice shook as he muttered, "I can't stop now." The following day, as David walked through a crowded subway station, a sharp voice cut through the noise. "Stop digging," it warned. He turned sharply, but the speaker had already vanished into the sea of commuters. His pulse thundered as he searched the faces around him, strangers moving mechanically, none meeting his gaze. He clutched his notebook tighter, the spiral symbol etched across the cover. For the first time, the threat felt real, close, and watching him. His breath came fast as he whispered, "They know." The crowd's motion blurred together, yet David felt utterly alone, trapped in a system closing in. In the quiet of his apartment, David discovered an encrypted folder buried deep within his laptop's drive. His hands shook as he entered a string of numbers that had haunted his dreams for weeks. 110,011. The screen flickered, then opened to reveal images of reality bending, streets looping endlessly, skies split like broken glass, faces repeating like copied files. His heart pounded. "This is real," he whispered. "The code is showing itself." He pressed play on a video file, watching the skyline ripple like water, buildings flexing unnaturally before snapping back. Fear surged through him, but so did vindication. The universe wasn't seamless, it was stitched. David returned to the archive to confront Thomas, desperate for answers. Thomas revealed the last diary entry from his missing sister. "I saw the strings pulling the stars." His voice cracked as he added, "She wasn't delusional. She was chosen, or erased." David's chest tightened, whispering, "The simulation took her." Thomas's hands trembled as he placed the faded journal in David's grip. "If you keep going," Thomas said softly, "you'll vanish like she did." David looked at the spiral drawn in her hand, nearly identical to the one haunting his own notes. He muttered, "Then she knew. Before anyone else." Later that night, David confronted Marcus with the contradictions in his files. Marcus smiled coolly, replying, "I gave you exactly what you needed. To chase shadows." Rage surged in David's chest. "You lied to me," he shouted. Marcus leaned closer, smirk unshaken, and whispered, "You're too close to the truth, so I had to mislead you." The betrayal cut deep, not just as manipulation but as proof of how far the keepers of secrets would go. David clenched his fists, muttering, "You're not protecting me, you're protecting them." Marcus's silence confirmed everything. For the first time, David knew he'd been betrayed from the inside. At a late-night symposium, Professor Morgan revealed his hand. With deliberate words, he told the audience, "The simulation theory distracts us from real progress. Stop looking at it." But as David watched, he noticed Morgan's hand tighten on his notes, a subtle tremor betraying unease. Their eyes met, and Morgan's steady facade cracked for just a moment. David whispered under his breath, "You're hiding it." Morgan dismissed questions with calculated calm, yet David recognized fear in his tone. The keeper of secrets wasn't denying the theory because it was false, he was burying it because it was dangerous truth. Back in his apartment, David stood by the window, watching the city skyline flicker faintly like a glitching image. Lights blinked in unnatural rhythm, buildings seemed to shiver for an instant before steadying. His breath caught as he whispered, "It's breaking." He clutched his spiral-filled notebook, realization striking. The more he uncovered, the less stable reality became. He whispered again, voice shaking, "The code can't hide forever." Fear gnawed at him. Was he unraveling the truth, or unraveling reality itself? Behind the glass, the skyline rippled once more, faint but undeniable. He pressed his hand to the window, whispering, "It's all starting to collapse." David laid out his notes and digital files across Claire's table, his hands trembling, but his voice steady. "This is proof," he said, pointing to footage of the skyline rippling like code. Claire stared, pale, her lips pressed tight. "David, this is dangerous," she whispered. He leaned closer, fire in his eyes. "It's not paranoia if the evidence is real." She buried her face in her hands, whispering, "If you're right, we're nothing but programs." David slammed his palm on the table. "Then it's time we knew who wrote us." For the first time, Claire looked at him not with doubt, but with fear and reluctant belief. Late that night, David's past returned to haunt him. At the library steps, he ran into Daniel, his former colleague, a man he once trusted. "You should have left this alone," Daniel said coldly. David froze. "You knew," he whispered, betrayal flooding his chest. Daniel's eyes hardened. "I warned them you wouldn't stop. Now I have to." David clenched his fists, whispering, "You betrayed me." Daniel's silence was answer enough, his presence heavier than the night air. The truth was no longer a theory. It was a battle against people he once called allies. At a secretive meeting in an auditorium, Professor Morgan finally confronted David directly. "You don't understand the danger," Morgan said calmly, his voice carrying. David stood, voice shaking but loud. "Danger is keeping the truth from us." Morgan's composure cracked, eyes flashing. If people know, everything collapses. The system depends on ignorance. David stepped closer, whispering fiercely, or it depends on control. The crowd shifted, whispers rising. Morgan's facade slipped, revealing not a scientist dismissing fantasy but a gatekeeper terrified of exposure. David realized he had cornered the keeper of secrets at last. Claire stepped between David and Morgan, her voice firm for the first time. If it's true, then people deserve to know. Morgan's face paled. You'll destroy stability, he snapped. Claire's eyes hardened as she turned toward David. I believe you now, she whispered. Relief washed over David, though fear clung to it. Morgan's fury flared, his composure gone. You have no idea what forces you're playing with, he thundered. Claire's presence was the anchor David needed, proof he wasn't alone. He whispered to her, then we'll face it together. The choice was made. Silence was no longer possible. Back in the city, David stood on a rooftop, Claire at his side. The skyline rippled again, glitching in and out like a broken signal. David raised his notebook high, shouting, "The truth won't stay buried." His voice echoed into the night as the air around them warped, reality bending at its edges. Lights flickered across skyscrapers, cars on streets below stuttered in motion. Claire clutched his arm, whispering, "It's happening." David's face lit with both terror and triumph. The more he forced the truth into the open, the more fragile the illusion became. Reality was no longer stable, it was cracking under the weight of discovery. David sat alone in his apartment, spirals scrawled across the walls, notebooks stacked like towers. The laptop glowed with files he could no longer ignore, showing endless strings of code woven into every image, every sound, every face. His hands shook as he whispered, "This is the architecture of our prison." But with the revelation came a crushing weight. If reality was programmed, then every joy, every heartbreak, every memory was manufactured. Tears welled as he whispered, "What part of me is real?" The knowledge that once gave him power now pressed down like chains, suffocating him in the silence of the room. David met Thomas one final time at the archive. The older man's voice trembled as he revealed the last page of his sister's diary. "The ones who see the truth are erased. I'm next." His face crumpled, whispering, "She knew it would happen." David's chest tightened as he whispered back, "She wasn't lost. She was taken." The tragedy that once seemed like chance was now undeniable proof of the simulation's cruelty. Thomas wept silently, clutching the diary to his chest. David lowered his gaze, whispering, "Her fate is the warning, and the answer." The loss was no longer just Thomas's, it belonged to everyone. Claire sat with David in silence, the city glowing faintly beyond the window. She whispered, "If this is true, then nothing matters." David shook his head slowly, voice soft but firm. "No, it means everything matters. Every choice, every act, it's the only way to fight back." Claire's eyes welled with tears as she whispered, "But the more you reveal, the more dangerous it becomes." David stared at the skyline, the faint glitches rippling again in the distance. "The truth doesn't stop existing because we're afraid," he muttered. For the first time, Claire reached for his hand, choosing not doubt but solidarity. Across the city, glitches spread. Lights flickered in patterns too precise to be chance. People froze mid-step, repeating motions like broken code. A child's laugh stuttered unnaturally before resuming. The crowd murmured, confused as reality itself faltered. David stood in the middle of a plaza, whispering, "It's unraveling." He clutched his notebook to his chest, watching as the skyline rippled like water. Fear rippled through the crowd, panic rising, but David felt a strange calm. He whispered, "This is the proof. The cost of knowing." Around him the illusion fractured, but no one could unsee it now. On the rooftop at dawn, David faced the horizon as it rippled faintly like a curtain. His voice broke as he whispered, "Maybe none of this was ever real." Claire stood behind him, silent, her presence the only anchor in a world collapsing. He held the spiral-marked notebook high, then let it slip from his hand, pages scattering into the wind. The paper fluttered upward, caught by currents that felt less natural than scripted. For a long moment, the sky shimmered, torn between stability and collapse. David closed his eyes, whispering, "If we are code, then even code can rebel." The wind roared, the city shivered, and the final truth lingered. Knowing was both liberation and curse.